It started on a night so quiet you could hear the desert breathe. I was just a mechanic fixing trucks, not starships. But that night, the power went out, and the sky turned white. I thought it was lightning at first until the ground split open and something crashed half a mile away. When I got there, I didn't see metal. I saw light, alive, breathing, and a figure crawling out of it, not human, but not terrifying either, just hurt. He looked at me, eyes like mirrors, and whispered, "Help me fix it, and I'll show you something your kind forgot." So I did. Hours passed, bolts turned, circuits hummed, and when it was done, the ship lifted like smoke. Then he reached out his hand, and in an instant, we weren't in the desert anymore. We were somewhere else, and before us stood the Virgin Mary crying light instead of tears. Stay with me until the end, because what he showed me next didn't just question faith, it rewrote it. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. My name is Marcus Kane, and I've been turning wrenches for 37 years in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, the kind of place where civilization forgot to leave a forwarding address. Just me, my garage, and the endless stretch of desert that swallows sound like a hungry ghost. I never believed in much beyond what I could fix with my hands. Engines made sense. Transmissions had logic. But faith? That was for people who hadn't spent half their lives under the hood of broken machinery, learning that everything eventually fails. That Thursday night in September changed everything. The storm hit without warning. Not rain, not wind, just this electrical charge in the air that made your skin crawl. Every light in my garage flickered once, twice, then died completely. Even my emergency generator choked to silence. I stepped outside, and the desert was wrong. Too quiet, too still. Even the coyotes had gone silent, like they knew something was coming. That's when the sky exploded. Not with sound, with light, pure, blazing white that turned night into day for exactly 17 seconds. I counted because when you see something impossible, your brain grabs onto details like a drowning man grabs driftwood. The ground beneath my boots vibrated, then cracked. A sound like thunder rolled across the desert, but it came from below, not above. And then, silence again. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed into my truck. Whatever had crashed out there, someone might need help. In the desert, you don't leave people to die. It's the only rule that matters. The drive took 12 minutes across terrain that wasn't meant for vehicles. My headlights cut through darkness that seemed thicker somehow, like the air itself had changed. When I finally saw it, I had to blink 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't lying. It wasn't wreckage, it was beauty. The craft sat in a crater maybe 20 feet across, but the edges weren't jagged like you'd expect from an impact. They were smooth, almost organic, like the earth had simply opened to receive what was coming. The ship itself defied every law of physics I thought I understood. It wasn't built, it was grown. Curves that flowed like water frozen mid-motion. Surfaces that shifted between metallic and translucent depending on how the light hit them. And the light it gave off wasn't harsh or artificial. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat made visible. I approached slowly, my mechanic's mind trying to categorize what I was seeing. But there were no reference points, no rivets or welds, no obvious propulsion systems, just elegant impossibility resting in the sand. That's when I saw him. The being emerged from what I can only call a doorway, though I never saw it open or close. He was tall, maybe 7 feet, with limbs that seemed too long and too graceful for any earthly creature. His skin had a luminescent quality, pale but not sickly, translucent but not fragile. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They weren't alien in the way movies taught me to expect. They were ancient, infinitely sad, and undeniably intelligent. He collapsed to his knees beside the craft, and I could see he was injured. Not bleeding exactly, but leaking something that looked like liquid starlight. "Help me," he said, and his voice came from everywhere and nowhere. not through his mouth, but directly into my mind. Please, every instinct screamed at me to run. This was beyond my world, beyond my understanding, but 37 years of fixing broken things had taught me something more important than fear. When something's hurt, you help it. Period. I knelt beside him, my flashlight revealing damage to both the being and his craft. Burns that spiraled in patterns I'd never seen. Components that hummed with dying energy. It was like looking at a symphony written in technology I couldn't pronounce. I don't know how to fix this, I said aloud, feeling foolish for talking to empty air. You understand repair, came his voice in my mind. Gentler now. The principles are universal. Metal calls to metal. Energy seeks balance. Your hands know truth that your mind hasn't learned yet. And somehow, impossibly, he was right. I went back to my truck and gathered every tool I owned. Wrenches and screwdrivers that had no business working on alien technology. But as I approached the damaged sections of his craft, I could feel something guiding my hands. It wasn't magic. It was deeper than that. Like muscle memory for work I'd never done before. My fingers found connections that made sense even when my eyes couldn't understand them. Circuits that responded to pressure points I somehow knew existed. For 6 hours, we worked together in silence. He would gesture toward damaged areas, and I would find ways to coax them back to life. Not with force, but with patience. Not with knowledge, but with instinct that came from somewhere beyond my experience. The strangest part wasn't that I could fix his ship. The strangest part was how natural it felt. Like I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life without knowing it. When the last connection sealed itself with a sound like wind chimes, the entire craft shuddered once and rose 3 inches off the ground. The light it emitted intensified, washing over both of us in waves of warmth that felt like gratitude made physical. You have honored the old covenant, he said, standing with fluid grace. Now I must honor mine. He extended one long-fingered hand toward me. Come. There is something your species has forgotten. Something that was hidden when it should have been preserved. I should have been afraid. Should have stepped back and let him leave. Should have returned to my garage and pretended none of this had happened. But something in his ancient eyes promised answers to questions I didn't even know I'd been asking. I took his hand. The world dissolved. I can't describe what happened next in words that do justice to the experience. One moment I was standing in the Arizona desert with my boots planted in sand. The next I was floating in something that wasn't quite space and wasn't quite air. Colors existed here that my eyes had never seen before. Sounds that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my chest. The being whose name I learned was Zephyr guided me through dimensions that folded and unfolded like origami made of reality itself. Time moved differently here. I could feel minutes stretching into hours, then compressing back into heartbeats. Where are we going? I asked, though my voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. To see what was taken from your understanding, Zephyr replied. What your ancestors knew, but your institutions buried. We descended through layers of existence I couldn't name. Past realms where beings of pure thought moved like living equations. Through spaces where music had color and mathematics sang lullabies to sleeping galaxies. And then we stopped. Before us stood a figure that made my soul recognize something it had forgotten. She was tall, radiant, but not in the way artists had painted her for centuries. This wasn't the pale, ethereal woman in blue robes from stained glass windows. This was power incarnate, feminine energy that could create worlds or unmake them with a thought. Her skin held the warmth of every sunset I'd ever witnessed. Her hair moved with its own wind, dark as the space between stars, but shot through with threads of gold that pulsed like living constellations. And her eyes held depths that contained entire universes of compassion. But it was her tears that stopped my breath completely. They weren't water. They weren't even liquid in any sense I understood. They were crystallized light, each drop containing what looked like entire galaxies. As they fell from her face, they didn't disappear. They hung in the air around her, creating a constellation of sorrow that was somehow the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She grieves, Zephyr said softly. She has been grieving for 2,000 years. Grieving for what? I whispered, afraid to speak too loudly in the presence of something so sacred. For the truth that was stolen, for the power that was hidden, for the children who forgot their divine nature. The Virgin Mary, if that's truly who this was, turned her gaze toward me, and I felt my entire existence laid bare. Not judged, not weighed, just seen completely. Every mistake I'd ever made, every kindness I'd shown, every moment of doubt and every flash of wonder, all of it acknowledged and accepted without condition. Marcus, she said, and her voice was like honey poured over starlight. You have served the ancient covenant by healing what was broken. Now you must witness what your kind has forgotten about creation itself. She gestured with one hand, and the space around us began to shift. The floating tears of light moved, arranging themselves into patterns that hurt my mind to follow. But slowly, gradually, I began to understand what I was seeing. It was a map, not of geography, but of spiritual evolution. Each point of light represented a moment when divine consciousness had touched human understanding, and I could see the connections, the flow of knowledge from one point to another across centuries. Your species was never meant to worship from a distance, she continued, her voice carrying sadness that made my chest ache. You were meant to remember that divinity flows through every living being, that the power to heal, to create, to transform reality exists within each soul. Zephyr moved closer, his luminescent form casting new shadows in the tear light surrounding us. What you call miracles were simply demonstrations of abilities that all consciousness possesses when it remembers its true nature. But the institutions, I said, pieces of understanding clicking into place like gears in an engine I was finally learning to repair. They taught us we were separate from the divine, that we needed intermediaries. Mary's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw not the serene mother of religious art, but something fierce and protective. They took the truth and made it a prison. They took the power and made it a commodity. They took the direct experience of divine love and made it conditional on obedience. She reached toward one of the floating tears, and it expanded like a bubble, becoming transparent. Inside, I could see visions that made my worldview crack and reshape itself. I saw her not as a passive vessel, but as a conscious participant in a cosmic event that required tremendous spiritual strength. I saw her training in traditions that had been systematically erased from historical records. I saw her working with other women who possessed similar abilities, all of them part of a network that understood the true nature of incarnated divinity. The birth of the Christ consciousness, she explained as the visions continued, was not a singular event limited to one individual. It was a demonstration of what becomes possible when human consciousness fully remembers its divine nature. Another tear expanded, showing me Jesus not as the lone Son of God, but as one of many beings throughout history who had achieved complete integration of human and divine awareness. I saw others across cultures and centuries, all teaching the same fundamental truth that divinity was not external, but internal, not distant, but immediate. Why are you showing me this? I asked, overwhelmed by the implications of what I was witnessing. Because the time of forgetting is ending, she replied. Because consciousness is awakening on your world, and those who remember must help others remember too. Zephyr stepped forward, his ancient eyes reflecting the tear light around us. Your world stands at a crossroads, Marcus. The old systems of separation and control are crumbling, but they will not go quietly. They will fight to maintain the illusion that power comes from outside rather than from within. I watched as more tears expanded, showing me possible futures. In some, humanity awakened to its divine nature and created civilizations based on love and conscious creation. In others, fear and control won out, leading to stagnation and eventual collapse. What am I supposed to do with this knowledge? I asked, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on my shoulders like lead. Mary smiled then, and her smile was sunrise after the longest night. You do what you have always done, Marcus. You fix what is broken. But now you understand that the most important repairs happen not to machines, but to the connection between human consciousness and its divine source. She gestured again, and one final tear expanded before me. This one showed not visions of the past or future, but something that made my heart skip beats. It showed me returning to my garage, but different somehow, awakened, able to see the divine spark in every person who came seeking help. The healing begins with remembering, she said as the vision faded, and remembering begins with those willing to see beyond the veils that have hidden truth for so long. The space around us began to shift again, and I felt the pull of return calling me back to my physical form. But before the transition could complete, Mary stepped forward and placed her hand on my forehead. The touch sent waves of recognition through every cell in my body. Not new knowledge, but ancient memory awakening. I remembered what it felt like to be connected to the source of all creation. I remembered the power that flowed through conscious beings when they stopped believing in separation. And I remembered my true purpose. Go now, she said, as the dimensional space began to dissolve around us. Return to your world and help others remember what they have forgotten. The age of awakening has begun. The journey back to my physical form felt like being pulled through layers of thick honey. Each dimension we passed through left traces of itself in my consciousness, fragments of understanding that would take years to fully process. When my boots finally touched Arizona sand again, I staggered like a drunk man finding his legs. Zephyr stood beside his craft, no longer the injured being I'd helped hours earlier. He radiated health and purpose now, his luminescent skin pulsing with energy that made the air itself seem more alive. The knowledge will unfold gradually, he said, his voice still resonating inside my mind. Too much too quickly would shatter human consciousness like glass hit with a hammer. What you experienced tonight is just the beginning. I looked down at my hands, still trembling from touching the divine. They looked the same calloused, oil-stained fingers that had turned wrenches all my life. But something fundamental had changed. I could feel energy flowing through them now, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Others like you exist, Zephyr continued, walking slowly around his craft as it prepared for departure, scattered across your world, awakening to remember what they truly are. Mechanics and teachers, doctors and farmers, all chosen because they serve others without seeking glory. The ship began to hum, its surfaces shifting and flowing like living metal. Why mechanics? I asked, needing to understand my place in whatever was unfolding. Because you understand that everything broken can be repaired if you know where to look for the source of the damage, he replied. And consciousness, Marcus, is the ultimate repair job. As his craft lifted silently into the star-filled sky, I felt a profound loneliness settle over me. Who could I tell about what I'd experienced? Who would believe that the Virgin Mary existed as a being of pure love and power, grieving for humanity's forgotten divinity? The answer came 3 days later. I was under the hood of Tom Bradley's pickup, replacing a worn alternator when I felt it. A shift in the air, a change in the quality of light filtering through my garage windows. Tom was rambling about his crops and the weather, but his voice faded to background noise as my attention focused on something else entirely. There was a woman standing in my doorway, mid-40s, wearing nurse scrubs, with tired eyes that held depths I recognized immediately. She'd driven out from Phoenix, she said, because her car had been making strange noises. But as she spoke, I could see the real reason written in her energy field. She was awakening too. Mrs. Patterson? I said, wiping my hands on a rag that suddenly felt sacred. Let me take a look at that car of yours. Her vehicle, a 10-year-old Honda with 200,000 miles, ran perfectly. The engine purred like a contented cat, The transmission shifted smoothly, and every system checked out normal, but I pretended to examine it thoroughly, buying time to figure out how to approach what was really happening. "You've been having dreams," I said finally, not looking at her directly. "Dreams about light and voices telling you that everything you learned about healing is just the surface." She went completely still. "How did you know that?" I straightened up from the engine bay and met her eyes. "Because 3 nights ago, I fixed a ship that shouldn't exist and met someone who showed me that everything we think we know about reality is incomplete." For a moment, I thought she'd laugh or call me crazy. Instead, tears began streaming down her face. "I've been working in the ICU for 22 years, she whispered. "And lately, I've been able to tell which patients are going to make it just by touching them. Not from their vitals or their charts, but from something I can feel in their energy." We talked for 3 hours that day. She told me about patients who recovered from terminal conditions after she'd held their hands and prayed in ways that didn't match anything her Methodist upbringing had taught her. I told her about the tears of light and the truth about divine consciousness flowing through every living being. By the time she left, we both understood we weren't alone. Word travels in small ways in the desert. A conversation here, a knowing look there, people drawn together by synchronicities that felt orchestrated by forces beyond coincidence. Within 6 months, 12 of us were meeting weekly in my garage after hours. There was Sarah, the nurse who could feel healing energy through her hands. David, a high school physics teacher who'd started seeing mathematical equations that described spiritual dimensions. Maria, who ran the local diner and had begun receiving visions of people's past lives while serving them coffee. Each of us carrying pieces of a larger puzzle that was slowly revealing itself. We didn't call ourselves a church or a spiritual group. We were just people who'd remembered something important and were trying to figure out what to do with the knowledge. But as we shared our experiences, patterns emerged that changed how we saw everything. The abilities we were developing weren't random gifts from above. They were natural functions of human consciousness that had been systematically suppressed for centuries. Sarah's healing touch, David's multidimensional mathematics, Maria's psychic insights, they were all variations of the same fundamental capacity to perceive and interact with reality beyond the physical plane. "It's like we're computers that have been running on minimal software our whole lives," David explained one evening, sketching energy diagrams on my whiteboard. "And now someone's upgrading our operating systems to access functions we always had, but never knew existed." The upgrades weren't always comfortable. As my own abilities developed, I found myself overwhelmed by the amount of information I could perceive. Every machine I worked on told me stories who own about the peopled them. Every person who walked into my garage carried visible energy patterns that revealed their emotional states, their health issues, their spiritual development. But the most challenging aspect was the loneliness of knowledge that couldn't be shared openly. We were living in a world where most people still believed consciousness was produced by the brain, where healing happened only through chemicals and surgery, where the divine was something distant and separate from human experience. "How do we help others remember?" Maria asked during one of our meetings, without sounding completely insane. The answer came from an unexpected source. I was closing up the garage late one Tuesday when I felt that familiar shift in energy that meant something significant was about to happen. A car pulled into my lot, an expensive sedan that looked out of place in my corner of nowhere. The driver was a man in his 60s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, but his eyes held the same depth I'd learned to recognize in others who were awakening. "Mr. Kane," he said, extending a hand that radiated warmth. "My name is Robert Chen. I'm a cardiologist from Los Angeles, and I believe we have something important to discuss." Dr. Chen had been experiencing the same phenomenon that had touched all of us, patients responding to his presence in ways that transcended medical explanation, surgical procedures succeeding against all odds when he worked from a state of loving intention. heart conditions healing through methods that couldn't be documented in medical journals. I've been researching others like us, he said as we sat in my office, sharing coffee that tasted somehow more real than it had before my awakening. Doctors, teachers, engineers, artists, people in every profession who are remembering abilities that human consciousness possessed long before modern civilization convinced us we were separate from the divine. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a network that spanned continents. Thousands of individuals, all experiencing similar awakenings, all learning to integrate expanded consciousness with practical service in the world. The interesting thing is the timing, he continued. These awakenings started accelerating dramatically about 5 years ago, almost like someone threw a switch. I thought about Zephyr and his words about consciousness evolution, about Mary's tears of light and the crossroads humanity was approaching. Maybe someone did. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. The question is what we do with this responsibility. Because make no mistake, Marcus, this is a responsibility. We've been given access to capabilities that could transform how our species relates to healing, to consciousness, to the divine nature within every person. Over the following months, our small desert group connected with others around the world. We learned about teachers who could transmit knowledge directly through consciousness contact, engineers who designed technology by channeling information from higher dimensional sources, artists whose work awakened spiritual memories in everyone who experienced it. But we also learned about the resistance. As more people began awakening to their divine nature, institutions built on the premise of human limitation began pushing back. Medical boards investigating doctors who achieved impossible healing results. Educational systems suppressing teachers who helped students access expanded awareness. Religious organizations condemning anyone who suggested direct connection to the divine was possible without their mediation. They're not evil, Dr. Chen explained during one of our video conferences. They're just operating from old programming that equates control with safety. The idea that every human carries divine consciousness terrifies systems built on the assumption that power comes from outside. The resistance wasn't just institutional. As our abilities developed, we discovered that expanded consciousness came with expanded responsibility. Sarah found herself unable to ignore the suffering she could perceive in everyone around her. David struggled with mathematical insights that revealed the illusory nature of physical reality. Maria was overwhelmed by visions of past lives and future possibilities that made normal conversation nearly impossible. I used to think awakening would make everything easier, she confided during one of our gatherings. I didn't realize that seeing truth clearly would be so demanding. But we also discovered that we weren't meant to carry this knowledge alone. The network Dr. Chen had revealed included support, training protocol systems, and most importantly, a sense of cosmic purpose that made the challenges bearable. We were living through the early stages of a consciousness revolution that would either elevate humanity to its next evolutionary phase or collapse under the weight of institutional resistance. And each of us had a role to play in determining which outcome manifested. The old world is ending, I told our group one evening as we watched the sun set over the desert and were midwives helping birth the new one. What I didn't expect was how the awakening would spread like ripples across still water. Each person who remembered their divine nature became a catalyst for others. The woman who bought groceries from Maria started having prophetic dreams. The farmer whose tractor I repaired began healing his livestock through touch alone. The students in David's physics class started asking questions about consciousness that weren't in any textbook. But with expansion came scrutiny. Marcus Kane, the voice belonged to a man in a crisp federal suit standing in my garage doorway at 7 in the morning. Behind him, 2 others in identical attire scanned my workspace with eyes that missed nothing. Depends who's asking, replied, not looking up from the transmission I was rebuilding. Agent Morrison, Department of Unexplained Phenomena. We need to discuss some unusual reports filed about activities in this area. My hands kept working even as my heart rate spiked. 6 months since Zephyr's visit, and I'd wondered when this moment would come. What kind of activities? The kind that violate several federal regulations about unreported contact with non-terrestrial entities. I set down my wrench and faced him directly. You believe in aliens, Agent Morrison? His smile was thin as paper. I believe in national security threats, and unauthorized contact with advanced technologies falls under that category. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. They asked about the craft, about Zephyr, about the changes in my behavior that several locals had reported. I told them nothing about Mary, nothing about the network of awakening individuals, nothing about the truth that was spreading like dawn across human consciousness. We know something happened here, Mr. Kane, Morrison said as they prepared to leave. And we know it's connected to similar incidents worldwide. People developing unexplained abilities, medical anomalies, reports of encounters with entities claiming to offer spiritual enlightenment. He handed me a business card that felt cold against my palm. When you decide to cooperate fully, call this number, because this phenomenon you're part of, it's bigger than you realize, and it's about to become a problem. After they left, I called an emergency meeting. Our group gathered that night in Sarah's basement instead of my garage, speaking in whispers about surveillance and the implications of federal attention. They're cataloging us, Dr. Chen confirmed through encrypted video, creating files on anyone exhibiting expanded consciousness abilities. The medical boards, educational authorities, religious institutions, they're all sharing information about individuals who deviate from accepted norms. What are they afraid of? David asked, his teacher's mind struggling to understand the logic. Revolution, I answered, remembering Mary's words about the age of awakening. They're afraid that if enough people remember their divine nature, the old systems of control become irrelevant. Maria nodded grimly. I've been seeing it in my visions. 2 timelines diverging. In one, humanity awakens to its spiritual potential and creates a world based on love and conscious creation. In the other, fear wins, and we slide into a dark age of surveillance and suppression. The weight of cosmic responsibility settled over us like a lead blanket. We weren't just individuals having personal spiritual experiences anymore. We were participants in a species-wide transformation that powerful forces were actively trying to prevent. So what do we do? Sarah asked, her healer's instincts seeking practical solutions. The answer came from within, rising up from that place, where divine guidance meets human determination. We keep serving, I said. We keep healing. We keep demonstrating what becomes possible when consciousness remembers its true nature, and we trust that truth has its own power to spread. Over the following weeks, our approach evolved. Instead of hiding our abilities, we integrated them more naturally into our everyday work. Sarah's healing touch became simply good bedside manner. David's multidimensional insights were presented as innovative teaching methods. Maria's psychic awareness manifested as exceptional customer service. The results were undeniable. Sarah's patients experienced faster recoveries and fewer complications. David's students scored higher on tests and showed increased creativity. Maria's diner became a gathering place where people felt mysteriously better after spending time there. That was 3 years ago. Today, I still fix engines in the Arizona desert, but I'm not the same mechanic who helped a wounded traveler that quiet September night. The divine spark Mary showed me burns in everything I touch now. Every repair becomes an act of healing. Every person who walks into my garage carries light I can see. The network has grown beyond anything we imagined. Thousands of awakened souls worldwide, remembering what we forgot, demonstrating what becomes possible when consciousness recognizes its true nature. The old systems fight back, but truth spreads like wildfire through dry grass. Mary's tears of light still fall in dimensions beyond this one, but now I understand what she grieves for is ending. The age of separation is dying. The age of remembering has begun. If you felt that spark of recognition while listening to this story, You're probably part of this awakening too. The question isn't whether you have divine abilities. The question is when you'll stop pretending you don't.